And I thought it'd be perfect to bring you in tonight to basically uncover some parts of the journey that he took, founding a security company.
Not here, but in Canada.
Yeah, that's right.
People do want to attack us in Canada.
Yeah, that's right. And just share some of these experiences, because it's something that typically people are not exposed to on a regular basis, and some of the insight is terrific, and I thought it would be great to share. So, Dimitri, if you could start, but maybe just provide some background, how you got to where you are today.
Sure. So I was living in Canada, as David pointed out, and after graduate school in physics, I worked for a bit and then started my first company in network security. Did that for a couple of years, left that. I was doing that in Seattle, moved back to Vancouver, started another company focused on the problem of API networking and security. So we did both connectivity, kind of middleware type stuff. But security was always a big thesis of us, just because we felt that web services and APIs were going to introduce a new vector for potential exploitation, and so we started building that a while ago. 2003 is when we got started, and grew that to 35 million in revenue, and then sold it to an American company, and then I found myself in America.
It just sounds so
I came to America.
It just sounds so easy, to start a company and then grow it to 35 million and then turn it to a $1 billion organization. What was in that growth stage, maybe I can provide some insight, what was the most difficult part, maybe in the beginning, the early years of the company?
Sure. I think getting our first customer was pretty hard. Trying to convince people when, nobody was really getting exploited through APIs, that they needed security for APIs. Nobody was publishing. The simple answer to, there's a concern around APIs potentially introducing risk. The simple response is, great, I just won't open up any APIs to the outside world. And it really took some sea change in the IT landscape. I think in the presentation you just saw, you saw the kind of increase in mobility. There's a slide, I think, early on around the progression around mobility and users being outside, and then secondly around cloud. And both, drove demand for API security management technology. But prior to that, it was a bit of an evangelical sale. So it took a sea change in IT.
Right. So I have some kind of tough questions here.
Tougher the better.
Yeah. What's the single most important reason for your success? That's a tough one.
My mother. That's what she would like to hear. Yeah, you know what? Look, I don't think, there's obviously overnight success you read about and you hear about and you envy it. Ours was not that. Ours was very much elbow grease. It was very much trial and error, and a lot of error. And we had internal friction. It was hard, right? But it was just, I think there was a perseverance. And so I think the thing that sometimes I'm credited with, and I think the thing that I'm reasonably good at, and the thing that I encourage everybody else to try and be good at, is perseverance, right? I think all of us are going to end up falling down. We're going to hit walls. We're going to do all those things that 2-year-olds do. And the key thing is to remember to kind of get back up and still toddle along.
So, the IT security used to take almost backstage, maybe like when you started the company. And, things have changed. I don't know if there's a couple of reasons for it, obviously, like, the target attacks, the Snowden and so on. How do you view the landscape in the past, say 24 to 12 months? And what would you recommend if somebody wanted to create yet another security startup today? What area of security would you pick?
Oh, which one? So just maybe to provide a little bit of color as to kind of why I would know that. So post acquisition, my new role is actually to scout technologies for CA around security. So I look at companies, and I look at kind of trends and so forth. So I run strategy for the security BU. Now, we're very centered, obviously, around APIs because of the Layer 7 acquisition. Identity is a big deal for us. But I think today, there's almost any area of security, whether it's network, whether it's endpoint, is important. The one thing I will encourage you, though, is that in the very last presentation, you heard about analytics and the importance of analytics and providing insight and providing anomaly detection and using kind of big data approaches. That is pretty common. So whether you're looking at endpoint, whether you're looking at network, whether you're looking at identity, I think looking at these more modern approaches to analyze data and be able to sift through these, I think one of the comments was that SIM has kind of failed, too many alerts. So I think that's almost universal. People are looking to use these big data approaches to be able to gain insight into their data sets and again, move away from prevention towards detection and containment or mitigation.
Great. So one of the questions that people have is, okay, I build a business, I got maybe my first customer, second customer, obviously I have a viable type of solution in place. How did you go about and raise funding? And if you can give us some insight in terms of how investors or potential investors view valuations, because that's something that I'm sure is something that's pretty foreign.
So I don't think anybody here is raising money in Canada, so don't if you don't have to, because the valuations are not going to be as good. So look, I think we raised money initially when valuations were low because it was post the apocalypse of 2002. I think right now security, you're fortunate that security, those of you who are thinking of starting a company, security is of interest to a lot of organizations. People are spending money, not just CISOs, but CIOs are thinking about it. CEOs, I think an example is, Target, the CEO lost his job in part because of the security breach. So I think it's very in vogue. People are looking for actionable intelligence around their security posture. So I think that there's a lot of ways to argue a higher valuation. Clearly, the further you get along before you have to go for money, so if you can get a couple of customers, great. If you can get a working prototype, terrific. The more you can build before you have to raise money, the better the valuation you're going to get.
Great. It kind of leads me to the next question. Was there a tipping point where, the company is successful, but you knew you're going to basically going to get it big and sell the company and so on? Was there a tipping point?
Yeah, so I think for a long time, quarter to quarter, you kind of worry, is the company going to be solvent in 3 months, and am I going to be looking for work? And I think that's just the reality of a startup, right? As you grow, especially for us, we didn't actually raise that much money, so a lot of our growth was sustained through sales. And so if we missed a quarter by any amount of dollars, it hurt, and it was worrisome. I think towards probably the last 3 years of our operation, we started getting into a rhythm. We started getting recognized by a lot of the analysts. So we were, number one in the Forrester Wave. We were, 2 years running in the Gartner Magic Quadrant Leaders. And I think at that point, you start getting calls, right? It's no longer about you desperately trying to find a way into an organization. They start calling you with RFPs, RFIs. And I think at that point, you start, you get called by the press when they have questions about your space. So it felt a little bit more predictable and a little, I became a little less paranoid.
So now the paranoia is gone and you're running a successful business. Looking back, have you thought it'd be different than what it was in terms of running a business and being successful?
Yeah, I thought it'd be a lot easier. I thought it'd be like it is in the movies. So I think it was a lot harder. It took a lot longer. My hope, I think one day I'll do it again, and I hope it'll be a shorter amount of time than 10 years or 9 years, whatever it was. But I think you have to prepare yourself for the fact that it's going to be a long fight, right? There are very few overnight successes. They happen a couple of times in Silicon Valley, but for the most part, it's really tough. But you know what? At the same time, it's a journey, right? And it's an experience, and I think it's a worthwhile experience. You learn a tremendous amount. You get a bit of gray hair, but it becomes kind of a part of you, and it is fun.
which is a great segue to the next question is, what's your greatest fear as an entrepreneur?
Well, I think being on the street, right? I think failures always kind of steals you, right? I think that if you require revenue to keep the business in operation, that's the fear. That's the thing that kind of forces you to go out there and actually knock on doors if that's what has to happen, right? So when we were earlier, there was everyone didn't have a clear role. So especially as a founder, if we needed sales, you have to go talk to customers. You couldn't say, well, that's a VP sales role. You had to be there to support salespeople. And honestly, I don't think I ever took a vacation. I think I took about maybe 8 weeks in my entire 9 years there. But even when I did, you're calling constantly just to see where, where's the quarter, where's this. It's hard to detach yourself.
And let's say, assuming you had to do it all over again, which one day you might, what would you do differently, if at all?
I think there's a lot of things that, frankly, I believe that it'll be easier, partly because I've had success under your belt, so you get a little bit of degree of credibility. So I think as you go out and raise money, you're kind of a known quantity. So I think that there's always a hope that you can find the early customers more easily. You don't have to wait the couple of years that it took us. I think the technologies that people use to build security products have changed considerably. So I think that's a lot more efficient. If you're building a cloud service, you're no longer waiting 2-3 years for your first prototype. You can probably get something out the door in 6 months. So my hope would be that, again, we can get something that is visible and you can share with both buyers and investors sooner.
And I'm assuming you see a lot of companies in early stages these days. What do you see are the largest pitfalls for entrepreneurs, people that have created companies?
The largest pitfalls. Well, look, there's lots of pitfalls. Not getting customers is obviously a problem. If nobody cares about what you do, that's a bit of a red flag. I think a lot of organizations focus on funding, right? And I think they raise so much money that they become a kind of a problem, certainly from partners and so forth. They become kind of a bit of a wild card. What are they going to? I think you just don't know, right? So I think that there's a tendency, particularly in the Bay Area, to raise very, very large amounts of money, and it does kind of, I do think it could in some way corrupt your view. You're no longer focused on winning business. You now just spend $5 to get $1 of revenue. But is that genuine business? Are people really buying your product because they like what you have, or is it because you just marketed and surrounded them with marketing and they'll try it out, it's free, and there's really no risk?
So I have a kind of a specific question to you, since you were responsible, among other things, to marketing your organization. How important is marketing, and how do you do marketing and sales in a startup? And then on top of that, is marketing security products different than marketing, let's say, insurance?
Yeah, I've never marketed insurance, so I don't know. But, so I think marketing clearly is critical. I think that it's critical in two regards. One is demand generation. Being able to drive leads, to drive revenue is absolutely essential. I think, if you don't know how to do that, figure it out. Because obviously today, particularly with all these digital channels, you need to know that. And I think you need to know that if you're the CEO, the VP sales, it shouldn't just be the VP marketing's role. I think everybody needs to have a intuition and understanding of how that gets done. I think the other thing, though, around marketing is really about brand building, right? It's crowded out there. The security market is crowded. The venture market is crowded. I know some of you guys are in industries with 6-7 companies. Getting above the fray, right, or above the noise, I guess, using a kind of a data analytics kind of approach, is absolutely critical. And there's ways to do that: analysts, trade shows, going to like VentureBeat and GigaOM and all these type of things. But I do think brand building is something not to look past. Clearly, customers matter, demand generation, anything you could do to get kind of in the funnel. I think if you have good investors, they could probably introduce you to your first prospects. But don't forget about brand building, because I do think as the world gets bigger and you're now competing against companies from Canada and Australia and all these other parts of the world, getting a brand is important.
So last question before we open it to the crowd here. how important it is to to choose the right investment capital firm like a venture fund? Because I've read somewhere where choose wisely. Don't pick they have to pick the right ones in order for you to be successful.
So don't tell my investors, but we chose whatever was available. So the reality is Vancouver, where I'm from, there was a choice of two, and I think both of them joined, invested in us. Yeah. So I think if you can get Andreessen Horowitz, I suggest you do that. If you get Benchmark, a Bessemer, or a Tier 1 like a Norwest, do it. I've heard they're great. If you can't, you can still build a business. You can still grow that business. You can still take it to an IPO or to some other, hopefully you find somebody that's going to drive value. I think our investors were a little bit more passive than I personally would have liked. But at the end of the day, their job is not to build a business. Your job is to build a business. Their job is to give you money. And make sure you take care of the money.
Okay. So I'd like to just open up the questions. If you have any questions, just raise your hand. Go ahead.
Talk about, especially in the early stages of the company, hiring, culture, defining a culture, how important that is, making sure everybody you hire, how much time you spent on that, or
so look, this is probably going to reflect a bit of my personality. I know everyone reads the inside page of the New York Times on Sunday, and they have somebody doing hand gestures talking about the culture that they tried to build. I think the culture somehow will tend to be a reflection of the founders. So I think if you have some homogeneity there, I think you'll get a culture that permeates. If you have people that are decent and respectful, you'll tend to get a culture like that. If you get people that are very focused on the end of the quarter, you'll tend to get a culture like that. But the reality is you try and hire the best, but you also end up hiring friends, people that and of course you end up getting this kind of echo effect around the culture, right? That's just the reality. I think people talk a lot about culture, and clearly there are organizations where Amazon, where it's doctrinary. They only hire, once they get beyond a certain point, people of that culture. But even now, I think the last couple of days I've been reading about how Google started off in terms of how they recruit, and they gave people all these mind puzzles, and they realized, we just ended up getting a bunch of people that were good at puzzles. And so, I think that the culture, again, will be a reflection of some founders and the early staff. But, Facebook had people from their dorm, that was the founding team.
How big was your company when you sold it, and everybody that was hired, did you personally interview up to that size?
No. So the company was 180 people. Okay. And no, I think I was busy. I think the managers, I don't think we viewed, if your job as an executive is to question all your other managers in terms of who they're hiring and bringing in, then you got to question whether those managers are the right people. So I think to some degree, you have to be able to let go, right? I think that if there's other, hopefully you have things to do beyond just providing oversight for everybody else.
Go ahead.
We've all heard stories about individuals, often young, who have generally successfully hacked in to major systems around the world or discovered exploits in software. In some cases, these people, once they're outed, or they might go public themselves, say that they're actually, what they're really looking for is to find work themselves or to get recognition. In some cases, they even have a little embryonic consulting business that they're launching. So my question is, are people like that investable in any way?
My cousin went to jail. Yeah. So I think the whole kind of class of ethical hackers. I think that if you were an unethical hacker and you were doing that for 7-8 years, and the FBI caught you, and then you said, I'm reformed. Now just give me some money and I'll do good, I promise. I think that's a very different question than if you decided from the get-go to, for instance, create an ethical hacking company and get contracts to basically try and attempt to exploit people's systems, but they knew that. Or you found a particular vulnerability and you informed the company privately. So I think if you did something that is untoward, if you tried to benefit from an exploit, look, I can't speak for every investor. Maybe there's, everyone likes to talk about a second chance here in America, but I personally probably wouldn't get a lot of money.
Thank you. Hey, Dimitri.
Ozzy, somebody who's very well known for unethical things.
So, you started as a very small company and ended up in hands of a giant with many employees, right? So, two questions. One, did this company's story change a lot from the day one to the last day, right? And actually, if you did, what enabled the company to keep on changing or adapting its story and still stay relevant and maybe ahead of the curve for such a long time?
Yeah, so
let me, if you can repeat the question. Just
I like his question.
Oh, no, just so if anybody else can hear. The question was in regards to the story. Is the story changed throughout the growth of the company? And if it changed, how did you go about that?
Yeah, so look, I think every company, if you're going to be, if you're a founder and, hopefully you have a particular innate talent for observing trends or observing patterns, right? I think all of us are probably pattern people. We detect patterns in our natural state. I think that's part of the skill and part of the character of a typical entrepreneur. So I think we all need to be prepared to pivot. Now, how much we pivoted, certainly there was changes in language. Part of that was, we were around for so long that literally the language to describe what we were doing shifted, and we had to jump on that. Like there's a generational shift. Younger people coming into the workforce started talking about APIs versus web services or SOA. There were technology shifts, so clearly we had to realize that just sitting on one product, we have to build additional products, additional capabilities that were particular to this kind of newer way of looking at the problem set. And I think to some degree, whether you're pivoting as an early stage company and realizing, look, nobody's buying this, maybe if I adjust it, or as a later stage company where you've established success with one product, but now you have to grow that product into a portfolio. I think either way, whether it's a pivot from your first thing or whether it's an ability to kind of accrete and extend, you need to have a innate capability to detect patterns, trends, talking to customers, seeing what's next around the corner.
But I was trying to understand something else. So strip down terminology, strip down terms, languages, look at the core technology on day one and on the exit. Is that still the same core that you and ideas and capabilities?
Yeah, so I think the core is still there. It is, right? I think some of the things we talked about 9 years in advance finally came to fruition, right? It took a long time. Again, when we started off, there was an image that was projected earlier saying, well, there's partner B2B connectivity. That was kind of the sole driver when we started. And you know what? It wasn't particularly meaningful. There's other technologies to solve the same problem, right? There's B2B technologies, AS2, exchanging flat files. You don't need real-time web services. So nobody really cared about the security of it. It was only when people started shifting towards smart devices. So 2008 was a great year for us. Once cloud started becoming big and people were integrating to their ERP system on-premise to Salesforce, great for us. Then all of a sudden this idea of managing how data flows from the inside of the enterprise to the outside, to these cloud services and mobile apps, and how that's done securely became a big deal, and that obviously helped us sell more product.
So as someone who recently took a job at a startup leaving a big corporation, what are the factors that you suggest looking at in the startup before considering taking a job there? What is a fair amount of equity for a startup that has a fair amount of funding and has its feet off the ground a little bit? And what, the single most important thing in trying to evaluate if the company is where you want to work?
Let me repeat the question. The question was, when you considering joining a startup and leaving a corporate job, what are the factors you need to consider in terms of I guess equity or factors of potential success and so on?
Yeah, so look, I think it's hard to ever say, well, you should ask for 1% of the equity. I don't know really what you do, and I don't know how many people they have, and I don't know if it's like one other guy or a company of 500 people. So to some degree, you're going to have to kind of make your best judgment. I think in the various internet forums, you can kind of figure out, what's a reasonable amount to ask for, the kind of role you have in the size of the company. I do think that before you join something, you have to kind of have some belief in the technology, hopefully. It sounds like they already have a little bit of traction in the marketplace. They have customers. They clearly were able to attract investment dollars. So I think all of that's good. Look, I think customers are the most important thing. If they've attracted customers in a repeatable manner where they have more than two that have said, yeah, this is something we need, it solves a pain for us, that's a great sign, right? And, a lot of companies don't even get there. So I think that's terrific. And I think, obviously, if you like the people around you, the people that you're going to be working with, I think startups are very different than most corporate environments. Both offer great advantages and benefits. This is really my first time at a big company, and I'm enjoying the time I'm there. But I think startups are great places to be, right? It's a much more intimate environment. You, as a group, are things happen at a much faster cycle. So I think it's a good experience.
Last question. Go ahead.
Yeah. What are the decision factors you made when to sell a company or wait for $19 billion?
So what are the factors that make somebody pay $18 billion for what's that?
Yeah.
So never having either sold a company for $18 billion or bought a company for $18 billion. Look, I think the thing that attracted everybody's attention to them was just their user growth. Like I met the CEO. Like it wasn't his personality that attracted anybody. Nice guy, doesn't say anything. But you know what? He didn't have to say anything. The performance of his company said everything. Right? I think they made it very simple for people to sign up. I think they didn't have to log in. They just up and went. Their contact information. I think it was a really powerful app. He's a little bit lucky with the timing. There was a time maybe 3-4 years ago when nobody cared about users outside of the U.S. And most of his users were not in the U.S. They were in Europe, they were in Asia. And all of a sudden, people care about those markets because those are the markets where you're going to grow into, right? The U.S. is saturated. So, I think there's a little bit of luck. But clearly, and I think Mark Zuckerberg said this, it's not every day you find an app with 500 million users. And I think that posed a risk, right? You don't know what's going to happen to them. They're a wild card. And so, before you know it, he's worth $18.5 billion.
I have one quick follow-up.
Go ahead.
What do you think is going to happen to Yo?
I think they'll add another 2-letter phrase. Look, I think it's funny. I was actually messaging with somebody who's neither one of us are terribly young, and it's funny that she used Yo as a way to kind of reach out to me. So it's almost like it's seeped into the kind of common vernacular that people use. I would never write somebody off. Getting users is powerful. Now, even if it's a novelty, right? Like whoever made the pet rock, they made a lot of money and it was a success. It may not have lasted. And same with the Chia pet, although I think that has lasted. So I would never dismiss something that has users. Is it trivial? 100%. Is it amusing? Is it fun? Do people enjoy the experience? They seem to. Again, I'm not a user of Yo. I'm not a user of Snapchat either. But both are doing, perfectly fine.
Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys, for attending the New York Information Security Meetup. And looking forward to possibly seeing you in September. Thank you very much. Thank you.